In today's world, truth and morality have gone from having a standard to now becoming very relative, without any absolutes. The existence of God is always doubted. Joining me now from Calgary to discuss this is Jojo Ruba, the Executive Director of Faith Beyond Belief. Welcome back to BCN, Jojo.
Glad to be here.
So first of all, what is your group, Faith Beyond Belief, all about?
Well, the name itself actually speaks to it. We believe that often when we talk about faith, we talk about a blind faith or a leap of faith. And we really want Christians, particularly, but everyone else as well, to understand that faith is actually more than just wishful thinking, that we actually have good reasons to believe what we do. And the Bible actually uses the word faith more like the word trust. And you don't just give trust away. Trust has to be earned because there's good reasons to believe.
Some would argue today that there's no such thing as an absolute truth. What do you say to people like that?
Well, I asked them if they believe that absolutely, and if they believe that's true, absolutely, right? Because at the end of the day, everyone has to believe in some sort of truth. And the way we define truth is just an accurate understanding of reality, that we actually live and know that there are certain things that we have to accept in order to live in the world. So, for example, the way we talk about truth is it's like having an accurate GPS system. If your mapping system does not work, you get lost. And people need truth in order to make sure they don't get lost.
Now, we often hear politicians say, oh, I misspoke. I didn't mean to say that. You know, the public, they kind of roll their eyes a little bit, knowing full well that that politician lied. Are young people being influenced by this?
Well, I would suggest that the fact that journalists and politicians are often on the bottom of most polling when they ask, who do you trust most? And I'm sorry to say, it's true, journalists and politicians are near the bottom. The problem is often pastors and religious leaders are also near the bottom in terms of trust. So we have to really rebuild that ability to say, yeah, there are actually authorities that can speak to these kinds of things. The problem is we live in a generation that think they're the authority because they can Google something or they can look something up on Wikipedia. And I think there has to be, again, that level of trust that we need to rebuild.
You know, and I truly believe that truth is necessary for society to function properly. Most people would still agree that truth in business transactions, in marriage relationships is really necessary for things to go well. What are your thoughts?
Well, part of it is we need to define truth properly, right? There's subjective truth, which are opinions and preferences. You know, your favorite kind of music or donut or whatever. That's up to you. But there's also objective truths, and the objective truths are true regardless of how you feel about them. And the challenge for us is to actually define those terms and decide which category things like moral truth or religious truth fall into. Most Canadians think it's subjective preference truths, when in fact the Christian claim at least says it's objective truth. And what I like to tell people is, look, there's a lot of things about Christianity or the Bible I don't like, but that doesn't make it false, because the religious claims that we make as Christians about Jesus' death and resurrection are either true or not. They can't just be true for you.
Now, the definition of what is right and what is wrong seems to have changed a lot over the years. How should society define what is moral and what is evil? Is it simply a democratic process?
Well, and that's part of the problem is we do live in a society that's a democracy, but that to think somehow that we can decide right and wrong. But as a democracy, we also believe in such things called human rights. And human rights are guaranteed in our charter, and we have rights that supersede or surpass what the government can do. The problem is if it's from something other than the government, it has to be an authority higher than the government that exists before and in any place at any time. Time and place don't limit that authority. And by definition, that's always been God. And that's why the preamble to the Canadian Charter of Rights is that we believe human rights come from God.
Now, many people argue that God does not even exist because if he did, why does he allow evil to happen, whether it's earthquakes, flooding, the shootings, and so forth? So how do you respond to that?
A friend of mine actually asked that question. How can you be a Christian if so much evil exists in the world? And I simply asked her, well, what do you mean by evil? Because evil, by definition, from a Christian point of view, is the corruption of what is good. Just like rust cannot exist without metal, metal can exist on its own. Evil cannot exist on its own. It's just simply a corruption of what is good. So, in fact, if you agree that moral evil exists, it's actually good evidence that there's a moral good that exists as well, which is God.
So what do you say to those who ask, how can we know for certain that God exists? I mean, we look at the mountains, the sky, the sunsets, the birth of a beautiful baby. But what else is there for miracles to prove that God exists?
Well, there's several things I would say, but I would even just add simply asking that question suggests to me that there's a supernatural order. C.S. Lewis says it this way: if we desire for answers, like the answer, meaning for life, or the meaning for why we're here, the purpose of our existence, if we look for answers and we can't find them in the physical world, that means we must have answers that are found in the spiritual world. And that's, I think, really the best point for that is, at the end of the day, if we want answers beyond our Darwinian material world and that there's spiritual reality, that means there has to be a source for that spiritual reality, and that would be God.
So how about the big question, who made God?
Well, and that's a wonderful question. And when atheists ask that question, my first question and response is, well, what do you mean by God? See, the Christian understanding of God is the uncaused cause. If you believe the universe had a beginning out of nothing, that means the universe must have started by someone who was not made of matter or energy, who lived outside of time. And if that person lives outside of time, he doesn't need a beginning. He doesn't need a cause.
Now, since God exists, how do you know which of the gods is the real one? Or some may say that there are in fact many gods, as the Hindus believe.
Well, again, that's a great point. And one of the points we like to make is that's why you test it out. Just like if you make a claim, one of the examples we use is a police lineup. You know, when you bring someone and they try to find out who the actual person responsible is, they put them, police put them in a lineup. And that's the same thing. You put all of the different religious and worldviews together as a lineup and you test them. That's, one of my friends was an atheist, or was at least not a real Christian. And he did exactly that. He put all these worldviews together and said, which one makes the most sense based on our understanding of science, on philosophy, and even on our just simple logic. And he said Christianity comes out. And here's why: Christianity is actually testable. You can easily prove Christianity wrong if Jesus is not raised from the dead.
Yeah, it's a basis of our faith, absolutely. Now, some of our viewers will remember Professor Anthony Flew, once one of the world's most renowned atheists. Now, he eventually admitted that there is some kind of God out there. Apparently, what convinced him was the complexity of the universe and the human body, which points to an intelligent designer.
Yeah, in fact, it's actually DNA particularly that helped convince him that, because DNA is a language. And languages can only be created by an intelligence, not by random chance. And even though he never became a Christian, he at least admitted that the universe, the human design, was made by someone, not a something.
Now, Jojo, what do you say to people that say all faiths are equal? Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, they're all equal, and you'll all find God in the same way. What do you say to people like that?
Well, I want to reiterate the fact that there's a difference between the adherence of a faith and the faith itself. So I would say, yes, Muslims, Christians, Jewish people are equal in value, absolutely. But all of their religious claims contradict. Right? Some of those religions teach there's one God. Some religions teach there's many gods. There are even religions teach that there are no God. Can all of those religious views be true at the same time? Of course not, because they contradict themselves. And the challenge that Jesus leaves with us, in fact, the Apostle Paul says it very well. He says, if the Jesus was not resurrected, the Christian faith is futile to believe in. And that's really the crux of it. If Jesus was who he claimed to be, he proved it by dying and rising again, that proves Christianity, and that shows that all the other religions that reject Jesus as Messiah as false. And really, I think that's where you have to go back to test the religious views, because they can't all be right.
A number of years ago, I had an interesting conversation with an imam in Pickering, Ontario, and that's what he said. He said, we have a lot of love and respect for your Jesus. He's mentioned in the Quran even more than Muhammad. He's a mighty prophet. I said, but that's the big difference. We believe he's the Son of God. He died and rose again, but you don't believe that he rose again, right? He said, that's right. Well, I said, if I believe that, then I'd be dead in my faith. That's the big difference between you and I. And what Jesus said, too, is that no one comes to know the Father except through me. So that's, I guess, the fundamental difference. Yeah, the only way you can come to know God is through Jesus. He said so himself.
Well, and that's the Christian story, right? And there are other religious claims, of course. But as one atheist discovered, and she was challenged by her husband, if you're going to investigate different religious claims, start with the one that's easy to disprove. Right? That's what Christianity is. Christianity actually offers a way to test it. When Luke wrote his epistle to his friend Theophilus, he said, I've investigated everything carefully. And this is Luke chapter 1, verse 1 to 4, so that you may know the exact truth of what you've been taught. The Bible cares if what we believe is true, not just for us, but true objectively. It's the way we say, as Greg Koukl says, it's the story of reality, of how reality actually is. It's centered around Jesus.
So, Jojo, some people have asked me, Hal, if God really does exist, why doesn't he just reveal himself to us? Not through nature or through sunrise to sunset, but just say hello.
It's funny people mention that, and it's interesting. If God were to write in the sky with his finger, "I am here," some atheists have already talked about this. Then they say they wouldn't believe that. They would think of some scientific rationale for what they saw, or a mass hallucination, because you can't make someone who does not want to believe. I think God speaks solidly to the fact that he will give the evidence that's necessary to believe. And Romans 1 talks about that with nature, but it's simply even asking for logic and reason, the existence of the universe, all of those things point to a designer of some sort. And the Christian story is that designer showed himself when he became a human being through the person of Jesus Christ. So the answer is he's already done it.
Some of the imams I've chatted with in the past as well say that ours is not so much a religion, but it's more a political movement. What are your thoughts when you hear stuff like that?
I think when it comes to these different religious views, they're all worldviews in some sort. They're all ways of understanding reality. And Islam, particularly, is a very cultural religion, which means it has something to say about every aspect of culture, including government. And I don't fault them for that. That's part of their worldview. The question is their worldview based on the right understanding of its creator, of our designer? And this is where we would differ, because in their worldview, their God is a singular person who does not experience relationship unless he creates someone else. The Trinity, the Christian God, teaches that God already experiences relationship, already knows what it's like to love someone because he's already in a relationship and wants to extend that relationship with others. So right away, we already see the relational God versus the Islamic God, who is a distant, far away God who can't be in relationship with us unless he made us. Right? And I think that's very different.
What's interesting as well, Jojo, is I've had a chance to interview some Buddhist monks, and they were telling me that Buddhism is more a philosophy, not really a religion, like Christianity.
Right. Yeah. And different sects of Buddhism actually teach that there is no God. And it's all focused on the individual, who's an individual Buddhist, trying to find his or her way into some sort of higher state. And again, the question is, if there is no God, who decides what the higher state is? It's like having speeding limits that are not enforced by anybody and are not actually created by anybody. Well, why do you follow that? If your neighbor put a stop sign in front of your house and it was just a handmade little sign, would you stop? Well, of course not, because it has no authority. And in the same way, if there are moral laws, they have to be given by a moral lawgiver, as C.S. Lewis said, who has the authority to make the laws and the power to enforce them. Buddhism can't find that answer if there's no God.
So, Jojo, would you agree that the fundamental difference then between Christianity and a lot of the other religions out there is that other religions preach you get to heaven by your works, but with Christianity, the work's already been done?
Well, yeah, that's definitely the big part of what the Christian story is. But it really goes back to the character of God. The Christian story says there is a maker of the universe who does not need us, but loves us. And we know that love out of his triune relationship. And we know that love because there's evidence he came down as a human being to die and was resurrected. So it's not just the teaching, it's the example that Christianity offers compared to other world religions.
Jojo Ruba, the Executive Director of Faith Beyond Belief, thanks a lot for joining me today from Calgary.
Glad to be here.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.